Welcome back into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. Sap, we were so excited to see Kevin Durant join the Phoenix Suns and see what that team would look like heading into the postseason, maybe build some momentum. We got a very small sample size where they look terrific, but now we have to pump the brakes a little bit. Kevin Durant is out. He may miss the rest of the regular season. They're going to reevaluate him in 2 or 3 weeks with an ankle sprain. He slipped during warmups, and I saw the thing too. It was very it was so weird. It was like you think of Kevin Durant as just this kind of basketball swan who just moves through, and it was like sort of an ungraceful thing. He just kind of collapsed on the court, and now he's out for 2 to 3 weeks. So Phoenix is fighting for seeding in the West, as everybody in the Western Conference is, with the exception of the Denver Nuggets. And so this is going to have a serious impact on where the Suns end up being seeded, Sap.
It's almost like the old man slipping on ice. It doesn't look all that serious until it is. And like you said, Jet, they'll evaluate his ankle in 2 to 3 weeks. They only have 4 weeks left in the regular season. So maybe he comes back for a final game or two and then is ready for the postseason. And it was looking seamless with the Phoenix Suns, right? They were 3-0 with Durant. Look at his numbers. He was averaging 32 minutes per game, only taking 14 shots, hitting 69% from the floor, 54% on threes. He was averaging 30 points per game in 32 minutes per game with a brand new team with Chris Paul and Devin Booker. And it just worked beautifully, like we expected it would, because I've said this a million times in the history of the NBA, there's never been a more efficient, great player than Kevin Durant, and a guy who could just drop into any team and he's going to fit in. It was perfect. And I think he will miss, obviously, most of the remaining games in the regular season. But if there's one guy who can just kind of reappear in the postseason and pick it up, it's Kevin Durant. I expect Phoenix, if he's healthy in the postseason, to still be a team that I think can make it to the NBA Finals. But as you said, Jet, where are they going to be seeded? To me, it looked like they were going to challenge Sacramento and Memphis for the 2 seed. Now they look like they're pretty much entrenched at number 4. Maybe the Clippers will surpass them. Maybe they're playing the Clippers in the first round. Who knows? We still got a lot of basketball to play. But yeah, just unfortunate because it looked like this was the team to beat in the Western Conference. Now you kind of have to just wait to see how that ankle responds. And it's Kevin Durant and Anthony Davis, the 2 guys now in the league that you just hold your breath every time they're out there, even in warmups, if they're going to make it through, because when they're playing and healthy, they're both great players, but they're just not durable at this point in their careers.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, this happens sometimes with players as they keep logging minutes and years in the NBA, that they start to break down, with the exception of LeBron, but now it's finally catching up with him after, all these years. So I don't think, when you have Kevin Durant on your team, you certainly can't expect to get, 82 games out of him. That's not going to happen. But I think that for Phoenix and for Durant, they would have liked him to play, 90% of the games that they had left, just to build chemistry and familiarity with the roster. And he's obviously not going to be able to do that. Now, is it going to make a huge difference? Like you said, he's pretty seamlessly fit in there, and he pretty seamlessly fits in everywhere. So maybe not, though. I would say that if they were, if this was the last year on his contract and Chris Paul was going to retire and stuff like that, and their window was just for this year, I'd say I'd be a little bit worried. But they have maybe a 2 or 3 year window with this too. So, maybe if they just don't have enough chemistry this year, that they should be okay to go next year. So it's not a massive deal in the big picture of things. But the biggest thing is, like I said, Sap, is the seeding. They really could have overtaken Memphis and Sacramento. Right now, they're 2.5 games back of those 2 teams. It'd be hard for them without Durant, I would imagine, to catch them now. The Clippers are 3 games back of Phoenix. Golden State, Minnesota, and Dallas are all 3.5 games back of them. So they could conceivably drop, below that line to the play-in. It seems unlikely, but again, it's not, before they acquired Durant, Sap, it's not a team that was playing terrific basketball this year.
No, they were slightly over 500. And again, Booker had been out for a while. He's back now, and he's an elite player. Chris Paul is the guy that makes everybody around him better. DeAndre Ayton's had a nice season. Not sure if he wants to be in Phoenix or not, but with the addition of Kevin Durant, maybe he's looking at it as a great opportunity to win a championship. But 5 through 13 in the Western Conference, separated by 3 games. So the final month of the season is going to be interesting, to say the least, in the Western Conference, to see teams that maybe on one given week look like they could maybe jump to number 5, and then the following week, if they have a tough patch, could be 12th and out of the play-in. So that's how close those teams are. But I still think if Durant is back for the postseason and healthy, and again, it's an ankle sprain, those things can linger. We know that. But if he's healthy, I still think that they could be the team to beat in the Western Conference because of that elite talent. And look, the chemistry was perfect right from the get-go. It didn't take all of about 3 minutes when these guys stepped on the court together that you went and looked and said, that works. It's almost like, these great radio shows where you put together 3 guys and they get on the air, and like 5 minutes into it, you just say, this is working. Like this is going to work. There's other radio shows that they can spend 6, 8 months together and it just doesn't work. The chemistry is not there. Durant, Booker, Chris Paul, and throw in DeAndre Ayton, who's a key figure on that team. It worked from the get-go, and I expect it to be the same in the postseason once he gets back there.
Yeah, the one question we had about Phoenix after this trade was their depth, and that's gonna, now have to be tapped in for the rest of the regular season as Durant is out, and so I think that they will probably end up right around that 4 spot, but they're gonna have to, now probably play Chris Paul a few more minutes than they would like, and Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton. Those starters are going to have to be leaned on a little more heavily if they want to keep their seeding. I don't know for them because Phoenix has a lot of postseason experience. Obviously, Chris Paul a ton, Kevin Durant a ton. That seeding will matter for them all that much. Home court advantage maybe is a better way to put it. That I don't think that will matter all that much. I think they'd like to avoid playing Denver in the second round if they could. Probably would like to avoid playing Golden State in the first round if they could. But because they are now such a veteran team, I think that they probably feel pretty comfortable wherever they end up in the postseason in terms of their seed, Sap.
Yeah, I mean, they're good enough to win on the road. Obviously, Durant is good enough to go on the road and win games. You look at Phoenix, and Chris Paul and Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton got to the finals 2 years ago, and they weren't able to win a game in Milwaukee. Milwaukee was able to win a game in Phoenix. That was in Game 5, and then Milwaukee went home and Giannis had 50 and wrapped up the title. So I think that would certainly benefit them to have home court advantage at some point during the postseason. But again, as you're the 4 seed, you're guaranteed of having home court advantage in the first round, and then from there it's a crapshoot because you have to hope for some sort of upsets. I mean, in terms of drama, the best thing would be a first round series against Dallas, Durant against Kyrie Irving and all that elite talent on the floor. And then maybe a second round series against Golden State if it works out that way. Durant going back to Northern California and taking on the Warriors. That would be obviously an interesting story. And then maybe you've got Phoenix getting all the way to the Western Conference Finals and taking on the presumptive MVP and Nikola Jokic. That would be quite interesting in the Western Conference. But again, a lot has to play out over the next month. We'll see what the seedings leave us with. And I think it's the Western Conference looks a little bit more up for grabs than, say, the Eastern Conference, because the Eastern Conference seems top heavy with the Celtics in Milwaukee and maybe to a lesser degree Philadelphia and Cleveland. But the Western Conference, heck, the Lakers are playing really good basketball even without LeBron. Anthony Davis, I know everybody scoffed at me when I picked him to win the MVP. If he had been healthy this year, he'd be in contention for that, and the Lakers would be much better than they are. They'd be in the top 3 or 4 in the Western Conference. He's played that well this year. He's been dominant, but again, like Durant, just not durable. But I think Phoenix will be in fine shape provided Durant gets out there. And again, he doesn't need many reps. I mean, this is a guy who missed an entire season with the Achilles and came back and was Kevin Durant. I mean, the guy can just even better. Yeah, I mean, the way he plays such an effortless game. He's in total control. He can score from anywhere on the court. He doesn't rely on explosiveness or athleticism. He's just an incredible shot maker, the best I've ever seen. So yeah, he could take a month off and come back and be just fine once we get to the postseason in April.
Yeah, looking at the Western Conference, it's so interesting in not just, how razor thin the separation is between a lot of these teams, but right now, if you look at the teams that would be in the play-in, Minnesota, Dallas, the Lakers, and the Pelicans, all of those teams are potentially really dangerous playoff opponents in terms of, a lot of star power. Minnesota obviously has, made the big trade for Rudy Gobert, but they want to get Karl Anthony Towns back by the time the playoffs start. Not necessarily sure, but they have Anthony Edwards, Mike Conley now. They're a dangerous team. Dallas, you talked about it, Luka and Kyrie. The Lakers, we've talked about that all year. If they could be healthy, what they'd look like. And the Pelicans, at one point in the season, they were the 1 seed in the Western Conference. They've fallen off, and no one really knows what the timetable is for getting back Zion. But if they have him and they're at full health, they could be a really dangerous team too. So, it's really close. And then there's teams, that are right below that line, Utah, Oklahoma City, and Portland, that you think all should be trying to, tank at this point, but they all seem like they're playing hard and trying to legitimately get into the postseason. So it should be, like you said, it's really deep. It should be interesting. After Denver, again, there's really nothing is settled. So that's going to make the race in the Western Conference really, really interesting down the stretch here.
Yeah, and if the Clippers and Golden State don't get their act together over the final month, they could be part of the play-in, and maybe one of those other teams you mentioned jumps them into the 5 and 6 seed. So it's just that wide open. Like I said, the 5th seed right now is Los Angeles, the Clippers, and the 13th seed is Portland, and there's only 3 games separating those 9 teams. That's wild. I mean, we've only got a month left in the season, and still so much up for grabs. Yeah, I mean, I still look at the Lakers. If LeBron comes back in a couple of weeks and is able to play at the level he was playing at when he broke the record, because when he broke the record, he was playing as well as he's played in the last 5 years. I mean, he was playing at an extremely high level. The only thing I would knock him for is his 3-point shooting was still at around 30%, which just isn't good enough. He should cut back on 3-point attempts, but he was playing at a very high level. He broke the record, and from that point forward, it seems like he seems gassed at this point.
Yeah.
Again, he's 38 years old, suffered that foot injury against Dallas. Now he's out for who knows how long, 3 weeks. I mean, the race could be on to see who comes back first, LeBron with the Lakers or Durant with Phoenix. But with Anthony Davis playing at that high level and some of the moves the Lakers made at the trade deadline, they're playing better basketball. So give them credit for that. I think they'll be part of the play-in. But if LeBron comes back early enough, maybe they jump into the 5 or 6 seed, and that has them not have to go through that crazy play-in, because that play-in is going to be a murderer's row for these teams. Like you said, Karl Anthony Towns is back. Minnesota's that much better. If Zion comes back, New Orleans would be a tough team to beat. And obviously, the Lakers are right there. I mean, it's going to be a free-for-all among all those teams. So it's going to be certainly interesting. I mean, the only team that you look at in the Western Conference and is set is Denver. They're going to be the 1 seed. Now, do they start practicing load management with Nikola Jokic, Jamal Murray, and the rest of those players? We'll see. But I also don't think that they're a strong 1 seed, right? I mean, as great as Jokic is, Murray hasn't kind of recaptured what he was a couple of years ago, especially the bubble. And, Porter and Gordon are both really good players, but I don't look at Denver as a strong 1, although they could make it through there because of home court advantage, and that's a tough place to play. They've only lost 5 games at home this year. So,
that's
maybe
team seeding is important for Sap.
It is. Yeah, they're so tough at home. They're so good at home. But Jokic, look, he's probably going to win his 3rd straight
30
MVP.
and 5, by the way, Sap, at home.
Yeah, incredible. I mean, they're tough to beat there. And Jokic is probably going to win his 3rd consecutive MVP, but he's not a guy that kind of elevates it in the postseason. Like we saw Giannis do that 2 years ago, where he got better in the postseason. Jokic, it's kind of the same in the postseason. And but look, he plays at a high level night in and night out. I'm not knocking him, but he doesn't. Where else does he go with his game? Is my point. I don't think he's going to go out there and start putting up 40-point games regularly. But he's got a nice supporting cast. But yeah, the West is wide open. I still think if Durant's comes back maybe for the last 2 regular season games and is ready to go, I would still put my money on Phoenix. But again, you hold your breath with them, because at any moment Durant or Chris Paul could go down. I mean, they're old guys with injury concerns.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, and like we've been saying this whole time, it's so deep in the West right now. And I think the Eastern Conference is a better conference because the top is better. But in terms of depth, it's not even close. You really need to be healthy and ready to go, because any of these teams seem like they could knock off another one of these teams. There's certainly no like, oh my God, we got to avoid playing that team. Like you said, Denver is not a really scary 1 seed. yeah, they're pretty dominant at home, but away they're 16-15. So they're a 500 team essentially on the road. And all you need to do is steal one in Denver, and suddenly you've got a damn good chance of winning that series. I think that it should be really interesting to see. I don't think people are expecting much out of right now. What are the 2 and 3 seeds? Sacramento and Memphis, but Sacramento's been proving people wrong all year. I'm sure they'll go in with a chip on their shoulder, and yeah, it should be fascinating to see what happens in the West. The team that's also interesting to look at right now, Sap, is Portland. For some reason still really wants to get in it, and if they get into a play-in situation, they're a dangerous play-in team because of the nature of it, because of Lillard. So like they could ruin a team that feels like they're okay, we can go on a deep run here, just get out of the play-in. They could ruin that team's chances because the nature of play-in being a 1 or 2 shot deal.
Yeah, Lillard's the guy who could put together back-to-back 45-point games, win a couple of games, and all of a sudden they're the 8 seed or the 7 seed. And then I think they would have a lot of issues playing Denver. Maybe not
No,
so
they
much
won't win a
Sacramento.
series, but they could win a
No.
play-in.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, when you got a player of that caliber, absolutely, they could win a play-in. It's like a couple of years ago when Golden State was part of the play-in, you kind of had a feeling that they could do it, and they played well, and Steph was great, but they weren't able to make it in because they had lost to the Lakers, and then they lost to Memphis, and they
Yep.
didn't make it into the postseason. So, yeah, I mean, Lillard is quite capable of stealing a game or two. They don't play much defense. Anthony Simmons has had some injury concerns, so I don't know where else they go with that. I would say they're better off not making it and maybe
Agreed.
getting lucky and getting the first or second overall pick and getting a player like Big Vic. But, that would be a long shot because they would have fewer opportunities than, say, Orlando or Detroit or Houston, teams that obviously are already going to be part of the draft lottery. But yeah, the Eastern Conference, I think it's more top heavy with the Celtics and Milwaukee. Philadelphia is a team that, look, since December, they've been the best team in basketball, but I just get the feeling with them that something's going to happen, that by the time you get to the postseason, that is, Embiid's going to have some issues, and Harden's never stepped up in the postseason, and Doc Rivers has blown a lot of big leads in the postseason. So where do they go from there? Cleveland's still the team I think people just aren't talking about. I mean, they're 3-1 against the Celtics this year, all 3 wins in overtime, which does say something that they're able to win in overtime. And then after that, I mean, Brooklyn obviously got rid of Durant and Kyrie Irving, so they're not going to be factors. And the Knicks had a nice run for 3 weeks, but they're still limited. And then you go from there. Miami, we're kind of waiting because you respect them so much, but they're just so old and depleted that I don't know. Maybe they can steal a series, but I don't think they go much farther than that.
Yeah, if you look at in the Western Conference, if you look at through the play-in right now, say Golden State falls into it and they end up being the 7th seed, they would be favored, I would imagine, against the Kings, even though they're the lesser seed, which virtually never happens in the NBA, but that would happen in that situation, I'm imagining. I don't see in the East a team that is in play-in position right now, or could potentially be, that could realistically beat one of the Bucks, the Celtics, or the Sixers, who are the 3 candidates for the top 2 seeds there. I don't think Miami, Atlanta, Toronto, Washington, Chicago, or Indiana has the ability to be able to beat one of those teams.
No, like you detailed earlier, Jet, the 4 teams that would be in the play-in the Western Conference are dangerous, especially if Zion's back with New Orleans and Karl Anthony Towns with Minnesota. Those are talented teams. In the East, yeah, what's going to happen there? Miami's just so old. Atlanta plays no defense at this point. They've made a coaching change, for God's sakes. Toronto has had an off season. Chicago's still a factor, but who are they going to beat? The 7 through 10 in the West is much deeper and more talented than the 7 through 10 potential teams in the Eastern Conference. The Eastern Conference is loaded with the top 2 teams. And again, Philadelphia, you do have to respect because of Embiid and his greatness. But you're right. I think that Celtics and Milwaukee would be able to get through their first round series pretty handily, right? Because you're talking about maybe Atlanta or New York or whoever. I think that they would be in good shape against those types of teams and be ready for the second round.
Yeah, I think, we can pretty confidently predict the final 4 teams in the Eastern Conference being exactly who we thought it was going to be. Well, maybe, people thought the Nets, but now obviously post Kyrie and Durant trade, not is being Milwaukee, Boston, Philadelphia, Cleveland being the, the final four teams left the
Mhm.
East. I think most people would say that's pretty much a lock, barring injury, barring a big upset. I know that, Knicks fans don't want to hear that, but I have a hard time seeing them beating Cleveland in a 7-game series, which is where they're at right now, where they would be playing Cleveland the 4-5. But in the Western Conference, you have really, I have no idea who is going to come out of that first round, because we don't
Right.
even know who's going to be in the play-in. So like, I can confidently say, I believe Denver will beat the 8 seed. Well, you know what? Actually, I
Well,
can't, Sap.
what happens? What
Because
happens
if
if
it's
it's the
LA
Lakers or
or
Golden State? Right?
yeah, if it's
Yeah. I
LA or
mean,
Golden State, I don't know.
does Jokic outplay Anthony Davis when they play? No, Davis actually outplays Jokic when they play. If the Lakers are able to win one of the first two in Denver, all of a sudden momentum's on their side. No, I think that's why the Lakers and Golden State, if healthy, those big if veteran teams that have accomplished a lot, who the hell wants to face them in the first round? Yeah, they could be very difficult to beat. But you're right. I think right now, as we sit here a month before the regular season ends, feel very confident that Milwaukee, Boston, Philadelphia, and Cleveland will probably be the final four teams in the Eastern Conference. Now you have to figure out what the matchups would be there. As of today, would be Milwaukee, Cleveland, and I think Cleveland plays them tough because they have a couple of bigs, right? Evan Mobley and Jared Allen. Not that they're going to stop Giannis, but they can at least get in his way. And then you've got, of course, Donovan Mitchell, who on any given night is the best player on the court. Not in terms of historically, but on any given night, he's the best player on the court. Heck, he's outplayed Jason Tatum when the Celtics play Cleveland in 3 of the 4 games. So that could be an upset there. I wouldn't call it a major upset, but it would still be an upset. And then, look, Philly just can't beat the Celtics for whatever reason. I don't know. Just they look across the court and see the Celtics, and they just don't have a chance for some reason. Celtics have the bigs that can combat Joel Embiid, and Harden kind of underachieves against the Celtics, but we're going way ahead of ourselves. But yeah, that looks like the final four in the East. In the West, yeah, you could see an 8 upset Denver if it's the Lakers or Golden State. Sure, why not? That those teams have the pedigree, and again, Denver still seems like a soft one only because they're so good at home, and that home court advantage in the postseason isn't quite as powerful because now you're playing back-to-back games in Denver, so the teams can get acclimated to the high
Yeah.
altitude and all of that stuff and the shooting background and whatever. It's not like you're flying into Denver on a Wednesday afternoon and playing Thursday night. You don't have a chance to get acclimated. When you play 2 games, especially in that first round where the thing is stretched out, I mean, you could be looking at a, Sunday, Thursday setup in Denver. By Thursday, you're used to the altitude, you're used to the background, and the home court advantage isn't as strong.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Sap, in that you have the chance to acclimate, and that's the big advantage Denver has in the regular season is teams are flying in sometimes the night before and playing a game. You have no chance to acclimate. You see sometimes the oxygen on the sidelines, not just in basketball, but when teams play at Mile High and against the Broncos. Hockey players are pretty tough. I don't know if they're even doing it against the Avalanche. But yeah, I think that's a great point, Seth. But I think the overall picture of the West is unpredictable, is the word you have to use.
Yeah.
Besides the Nuggets being the 1 seed, there's nothing else we really know about it. I don't feel confident picking any team to come out of that first round right now. Phoenix, I would say yes, but the Durant injury really throws a whole wrinkle into that. I think if he's 80% by the time the postseason starts, I would pick them, to come out. Right now, they would be playing the Clippers. I feel pretty good about that. The Clippers, for whatever reason, have not been able to get anything together. Though, if a team was to match up well with Phoenix, I suppose it would be the Clippers, right? Because they have the wing defenders that you would want. But they
Sure.
have just not played well through any real stretch of the season.
Yeah, you would think Kawhi and Paul George could match up with Devin Booker and Kevin Durant. I don't think they'd nullify them, but they'd make them work for their points. And they're a pretty deep team. The Clippers, well coached by Ty Lue. But yeah, there's a team that just can't get going. Like they'll put together a 5 or 6 game stretch where you're like, well, that's going to be a team that's going to be tough to deal with, and then they'll go the next 5 or 6 games and look so terrible that you're like they're slightly above 500. They'll be the 5 seed, but that would be an interesting first round matchup. But if you have a healthy Phoenix team against a healthy Clippers team, that would be probably the marquee first round matchup. Although Cleveland and the Knicks would be interesting, partly because Donovan Mitchell going to Madison Square Garden, where everyone thought he was going to end up, and the Knicks couldn't quite pull off that trade. Instead,
Yeah.
Cleveland did. Mitchell grew up a Knicks fan. We still love watching games at Madison Square Garden. Stars go out there. I think it would be similar to 2 years ago when Trae Young went into Madison Square Garden and just lit up the Knicks. I think Donovan Mitchell would do the same thing in the first round.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty safe assumption. But yeah, it certainly would be fun to see him do that. And right now, just to give you a picture, is the Nuggets would play against the winner of the play-in, so that would probably be the Lakers or Dallas. I don't know that. I don't think that either of those are necessarily great matchups for Denver. The Kings would then play the other one of those teams. I would think the Lakers or the Mavericks would be favored against the Kings. Memphis would play the Warriors, which would be really fun because those two teams hate each other's guts. And the Clippers and the Suns, as we imagine. If it played out right now, can you confidently predict any of those series, Sap?
No, wide open. Yeah, wide open, because if things click in Dallas, all of a sudden they become a tough team to deal with. So far, it's almost as if Luka is ceding so much power to Kyrie Irving. I think in their first 8 games together, in terms of the fourth quarter and overtime, Kyrie attempted 57 shots, Luka only 24. So it's like Luka's just handing it over to Kyrie during crunch time, which isn't necessarily the worst thing. I mean, but I think you have 2 guys who can close, certainly in Luka.
No, you got somebody coming in and ruining the team. That's very surprising that he's doing that.
There you go. He's the cooler, right?
Man.
So yeah, it is pretty incredible, isn't it? Whereas Kevin Durant goes to Phoenix and in 3 games, you're like, oh yeah, that works. Well, Kevin Durant, as I've said a million times, the easiest superstar in the history of the sport to play with. Just drop him in anywhere, he's going to work. But yeah, those Western Conference playoffs, man, that would be fascinating. You could see upsets up and down, and it'd be certainly 6-7 game series, which you don't normally see in the first round. Normally the first round is a sweep or a 5-game series. I think the Western Conference, you'd be looking at 6 and 7 game series. Memphis, Golden State, Denver, Dallas, the Lakers against Sacramento, Phoenix against the Clippers. Yeah, that would be totally unpredictable.
But the biggest, I think, X factor in the West that's so interesting, Sap, is we don't know who's going to be available in the playoffs.
Yep,
we don't know.
Exactly.
Think about the guys that are question marks right now for the playoffs: Karl Anthony Towns, LeBron James, Anthony Davis, Zion Williamson, Kawhi Leonard, Kevin Durant, Ja Morant, Michael
Steph
Porter
Curry.
Jr.,
I mean,
Steph Curry.
In a sense, because again,
Steph Curry,
Steph's been banged up over the years.
Off an injury. Sure.
Yeah, he just came back, dropped 40 right away.
And Luka is banged up right now. A ton of guys are question marks.
It could feel almost like the NHL playoffs, right, where it's whoever can survive this long postseason, or like football, where the healthiest team ends up holding up the Lombardi Trophy. It's just going to be this slog through the playoffs. It's not going to be pretty. Someone's going to be left standing in the Western Conference. Meanwhile, we kind of think that those 4 teams in the Eastern Conference may breeze through the first round and have it easier than any teams in the Western Conference.
Yeah, they should. I think they should. I think the Knicks and Cleveland could be an interesting series, but I think just top to bottom, Cleveland has a better roster than Knicks.
They do.
They would be obviously really juiced in Madison Square Garden. They'd be really excited the Knicks are there, but I just don't see it. Boston should not have a problem with Miami. I mean, they're tough, but looking at Miami as this year, the Celtics should be able to beat them, and Milwaukee will sweep whoever the hell they play in the first round, I'd imagine.
Yeah, true. Absolutely.
So, that's sort of like what's going on, what's at stake for the last kind of 5 weeks of the season. Before we go, though, I do want to mention that a player has really moved up my all-time popularity rankings, and that's Fred VanVleet from the Toronto Raptors, who just had an all-time great rant on the referees after his game and got fined $30,000 for his troubles. If you haven't watched it, I suggest going out and watching it. I retweeted it. You can check that out on my Twitter at JetStryer. I will say this. A lot of times when you hear guys rail against the refs, they're kind of yelling and flying off the handles. He was cool, calm, and collected with a lot of obscenities, which I don't have a problem with personally. But basically his problem was directed towards official Ben Taylor, who has given a lot of technicals, I guess, to VanVleet. and he thought he was terrible. Basically, he said, "I don't mind. I'll take a fine. I don't care. I thought Ben Taylor was effing terrible tonight." I think that on most nights, out of the 3 officials, there's 1 or 2 that just F the game up. It's been like that a couple of games in a row. Most of the refs are trying hard. I like a lot of the refs. They're trying hard. They're pretty fair. They communicate well. And then you have other ones who just want to be a D word and come off and F up the game. And there's no one coming to see that. They come to see the players. No one who's a basketball fan is going to be a fan of the referees. That's craziness. But I do think that there's been this sort of disconnect with the league where they've gone too far in sort of like coddling the referees. The referees have a hard job. I don't think anybody who's, a serious fan will say that, oh, it's easy to referee a professional basketball game. It's not. But it's gotten out of control. Just as much as the complaining has gotten out of control with the players, the refs being so quick to tee up players has gotten out of control. Missing foul calls, Sep, it's going to happen. It happens. Ejecting players because you're a referee and you get a little bit sensitive, that can't happen.
Wasn't there a game recently where someone got tossed with 28 seconds left in the game and it was a close game? Like, how do you do that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Unless the player is about to strangle someone and get physical with the referee, which should never happen. You can't throw a prominent player out with
Scott
28
Foster
seconds left.
ejected Scotty Barnes. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah. I mean, Scott
Shocking
Foster,
it was
obviously,
Scott Foster.
not quite sure how Scott Foster is still officiating in the NBA. By the way, Chris Paul has lost 14 straight postseason games refereed by Scott Foster. Like, that doesn't even seem possible. That should be part of an FBI investigation. Like, there's just too
100%.
much there to go into, right? Then you get Ben Taylor, who I guess VanVleet's had 8 technicals this year. 4 have been assessed by Ben Taylor. Like, how does that happen? We go back years ago. Joey Crawford had it in for Tim Duncan. Tim Duncan was like the most mellow superstar in the history of the sport. Somehow Joey Crawford had a problem with him. Look,
one referee who had it for Doc Rivers too, kept teeing him up. I forget who that was.
Is it Tony Brothers?
Tony Brothers. That's who it was.
Yeah,
that's who it was.
Tony Brothers was constantly teeing up Doc Rivers. It's just, that's the way it is. I mean, there were times, look, even growing up, there were big time officials. Like Earl Strom was known as a presence, and Earl Strom was the best referee for the visiting team because he loved making like controversial calls that would get the home crowd like totally pissed off. So if you're a road team coming into, say, the Garden, and you saw Earl Strom, you're like, well, we got a chance here. Most of the other officials, would kind of
he's like a wrestling heel, like a bad
exactly.
He loves
like
the booze.
Here would come the whistle. Okay, that's going to be a foul against Dennis Rodman. Wait a second, it's a charge against Bird, and Earl Strom's all fired up for that. So he was known as the road official, but he was a character. But he was a great referee. I think what happens here is when the referees are too sensitive in teeing up players and then ejecting players. And look, Fred VanVleet, that's $30,000 well spent. I think every other player in the league should kick in because now.
Marcus Smart already said, "I'm just going to refer you to VanVleet's comment."
That's all players have to do now. Because they won't get fined. They'll just say, "See Fred VanVleet, March 5th, 2023. He said it for us." So no one has to.
He
say
should be president of the Players
that.
Association at this rate,
without question, because it's CJ McCollum right now. So at least give him, a high-ranking vice president.
And Grant Williams is the vice president.
Yeah, Grant Williams. Yeah, well, oh man, imagine Grant Williams in a meeting. He probably never shuts up. I mean, the meeting goes on forever. He's complaining about, the coffee and donuts that are being served. But look, what VanVleet did was certainly interesting to say the least. It's a tough sport to officiate. They're all tough to officiate because these guys are huge. The game is played at such an incredible pace. You got to cover where the 3-point shots are. Like, how do you call that if the 3-point shooter's getting hacked or getting, fouled? I mean, there's just more to officiate. And then obviously you throw in technology where there's, 18 cameras at a given game and we can see everything in slow motion. I mean, it's years ago.
And the players are and the players are babies.
Oh, absolutely. The AAU culture, right? So it's just you complain about everything. And the game is not as physical as it was before. So now what is a foul? What isn't a foul? Is the official going to call it close on a given night? It's just difficult. But, you got to be careful when you're just teeing up players, tossing them in close contests. That just doesn't work. And as Fred VanVleet said, fans don't come to the games to see the officials throw prominent players out. I remember there was one game Larry Bird got thrown out in the second quarter. It was like, there's 15,000 people here who paid a lot of money for this game to see Larry Bird play. They didn't want to see him get ejected.
Yeah, you need to be, I think the league needs to say to them, it's a last resort to toss a player from a game. Absolute last resort to toss a player from a game. Yeah, they may need to go back and look at this and say, do we have to increase the threshold for how many technicals get a player ejected from a game, depending on what if it's technical for complaining to the ref. Obviously, if it's technical for, shoving a player, that's a little bit different. Yep. But you can't. Guys cannot be getting tossed from games, especially close games, because the refs are sensitive. It's not good for the sport. The refs are not there, like you said, to be the attraction. They're there to facilitate the game. And that means keeping the players in the game.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, let them finish the game. Let them decide who the winner is of the game, not the officials. I've always thought that 3 officials may be too many. So now they have to justify certain calls, but then the game is played at such pace with such great athletes that you do need 3 officials out there, right? Because there's a lot going on. And again, when a team is on offense, they're covering a lot of territory. Before it was pretty much about 800 square feet where you'd score from. I'm going to get really technical here. Now it's about 1,500 square feet where the offense is set. Before, you essentially would have 20 feet to either side of the basket and 20 feet out. That's 800 square feet. Now it's 25 feet from outside the basket, and 30 feet out. So it's just almost twice as much territory that you have to officiate. I mean, just watch a game from even the 90s. There weren't 3-point attempts. There were maybe 5, 10 3-point attempts a game. Now there's in excess of 75 3-point attempts per game. So you have to watch more. It's almost like if you made the football field bigger with every quarterback having Patrick Mahomes or Aaron Rodgers' arm and having Randy Moss as the average receiver. I mean, it'd be tough to officiate those games because it's just more territory that you have to cover.
Yeah, without a doubt. It's not easy to ref, but again, you got to keep the players in the game. But that's going to do it for us here at the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap. Thanks to Full Press Coverage. Go check out their website. You can find this, other great podcasts, articles, all sorts of stuff. So check that out. Make sure you check out our social medias too, at JohnSap25, at Jet Stryer. You can find the podcast wherever podcasts are found. Just type in the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, or find us on YouTube, youtube.com/Jet Stryer. If you're not doing that already, we'll be back next week with a couple new editions of the podcast. So make sure you stay tuned for that. Thanks for listening, everybody. See ya.